All right. What's good, everybody? Welcome to the Onyx Report. Hoping everybody is well. Oh, man. Been a good week. I am excited to be here. Happy to see everybody coming through. Shout out Christopher Williams for the early donation. Much appreciated. Shout out to Barry Little, right? Supporting our scholars and independent black male media. Hashtag, if not us, who? I love that. Thank you, Barry. That's tight. Shout out to Wrench Turner. Always supportive. Says on the wood. Good. Your efforts are appreciated. Good doctor. Much appreciated, man. Thank you for that. Shout out to Ian Graves in the house. BGS Ibmore. What's up, man? Good to see you in here. Folks coming through early. Much appreciated. Atlanta State FL, I think it is. I think FI or FL. Gale at night. Spain Man in the building. What's up, Spain Man? See people in here. Barry, what's up? Creative Force. Jones. F Holiday in here. Hey, Rue, what's going on, man? Busy Mike. We got Gary in here. Had a Soul. What's up? Salute to Gigi. Absolutely. That's the beat maker right there. Indigo Flow. What's up? Toxic Masculinist. Death Before Dishonor. Salute. Appreciate that support. We got Dion, Electrician 480. What's up? These Beats. Y'all know the deal. Like, share, subscribe, join, and donate. Support the channel if you would, so we can continue to bring you this independent black male thought. You can do so with the various methods on the screen at the very bottom. You got the Venmo, you got the PayPal, you got the Cash App, and you got the Patreon, But if you're not familiar, this is what it is. The Onyx Report, where black male justice advocates uplift black men and boys using critical analysis, right? And there are ways you can support the show by doing that. And one of them is becoming a patron. By becoming a patron, you can support the Onyx Report here on YouTube. You can support the Institute for Black Male Studies, as well as, the Onyx TV channel. It is what it is. So we still got a lot of irons in the fire, and we're trying to keep it that way. But there are a lot of different levels of membership you can participate in through Patreon or through YouTube. So you can choose to support either way, become members, various perks. I'll be doing more content for my patrons as well. So support the channel. And again, as I said, make sure you support the Onyx Network, which you can find on iPhone, Android, Amazon Fire TV, or Roku. Right? I'll be putting up some more content on that very soon. All right. Shout out to Electrician 480. Says, appreciate your hard work, brother. Appreciate you. Yeah, it's been, I've been a little inconsistent this semester. You guys know I was sitting on 2 search committees, teaching classes. So it's been just a crazy semester, but I'm trying to get back on track as I get my son ready to head to school. So your boy is definitely looking at empty nest life. So it is what it is. We getting it in. We about to celebrate his graduation this week. So it's all good. He's going to hit the stage, and I'm looking forward to that. So very happy about that. And salute to everybody out there who's going through some type of graduation, whatever it is. Salute to you. Congratulations. We need to support those endeavors regardless of whether it's academic, whether it's trade-based. I don't give a fuck what it is. So we got to support those of us that are putting in the work to elevate. Right? I'll probably be doing something about this more directly soon enough. I just wanted to quickly shout out, in case you weren't sure, I would highly suggest you go check out Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. My son and I went to go check it out. I won't be giving away any spoilers. All I can tell you is, yeah. Go check it out. That's all I'll say for now. I'll come back to that at another point. Probably, like I said, I'll probably do something specific to that or for that a little bit later. But yeah, you need to check it out. Mujahid, what's up? Assalamu alaikum. Wa alaikum salam to you too. Jeff, Barry, got everybody in here. All right, Mr. Ball. Layman's Journal in the house. Yeah. You know, y'all know I'm gonna have to get Artisan and Layman's Journal. We got to get together and talk about this because yeah, that movie was ridiculous. Anyway. All right. So let's get into a little bit. You know, got one more housekeeping item that I do want to make sure that we are aware of. All right. So I think I shared this with you the other week. If you did not see it, I want you to definitely check it out. So this is my upcoming book, and it will be out in July. But there it is. So this is through Rutledge. Solutions for Anti-Black Misandry, Flat Blackness, and Black Male Death, the Black Masculinist Turn. Right? So it will be out, available for pre-order on July 12th. We'll ship after August 2nd. So check it out. I put the link in the description box. I will also put it in the comments. So inclined, go ahead and save that if you would. And I would definitely appreciate your support when the book is out. So yeah, go ahead and check that out and support it so we can get that going. All right. This is a lot of the work we've been doing. We've been talking about for years. We're finally getting it in print for the world to see, backed by the appropriate amount of data. All right. All right. So I haven't done this one in a while, and I always tell you guys that this is fairly organic, but we're going to do one real quick for the Sacred Black Masculine series. Right. And this is basically an acknowledgement of what I argue Black men have been doing, you know, since time immemorial, which is basically being men, protecting, supporting, so on and so forth, all the things that we're accused of not doing. And there are plenty of examples. I just kind of handle it organically when it crosses my desk. But in this instance, we're going to look today at a gentleman named Jonathan McCray. Right? So shout out to Jonathan McCray. Let me make sure this thing acts right. You know, some of these little websites act a fool sometimes. So let's go ahead and check out Jonathan McCray a little bit. This brother is a hero, and I want to make sure he's acknowledged as such. Says the title of this article is "I Just Ran in There. Bystander pulls people and pets out of a burning Kenner house. Man says he saw a house on fire, so he stopped and rescued those inside." Right. So shout out to this brother. I'll let Snoop read a little bit of this to us, and we'll kind of go from there. So let's check it out. Crap. There we go.
Man driving past a fire at Kenner home stopped to rescue those inside. Thanks to his and others' selfless heroism, more than a dozen people are safe. Jonathan McCray says he's far from a hero, but the man who refuses to be called a hero did something very heroic. Man, I was just passing by leaving my brunch. I seen the smoke. Hey, I just went into survival. Help everybody out, man. That was really it. McCray said, my car was still running. I didn't even turn my car off or nothing. I just ran in,
started grabbing people. Could you guys hear that okay? Give me a 1 if you could hear Snoop a second ago. Make sure the sound is working. All right. Give me a 1 if you could hear Snoop read through that a little bit. All right, so this is the beautiful. Thank you. So this is the house, you know. So this is all that's left of this Kenner home. Fire department says 15 people were rescued from inside the house. No injuries reported. Look at that. Now, I've reported on stories like this over the years, and there have been plenty where you see plenty of brothers doing this for perfect strangers, right? And yet these are the kinds of acts that for some reason go ignored when it comes to Black men. So we see these articles, but often they don't really get the fanfare they deserve. So again, this one is in the description box. I will also put it in the chat just in case you might find good use of it to support, you know, brothers who are doing that work. So shout out to Jonathan McCray for his heroism, his sacrifice, his willingness to put his life on the line to save perfect strangers, right? And he definitely says, I'm scared of fires. He said, I know I had the opportunity before it got bad, It was just starting. It was maybe 2 or 3 minutes in, so I knew I had time to get in there. By the time I got in there, the smoke started getting real thick. I was grabbing everybody and just pulling them and grabbing them, dogs, and throwing them out the door. It was a lot. So, shout out to that brother, straight up. That's what's up. And I argue that this is daily. This is what Black men do. This is not new, but I still think it deserves the proper respect for the sacrifice. Because there's no guarantee he wouldn't have lost his life. None. In those situations, things can happen real fast. And I support that. And I shout out his willingness to do that. Right. All right. So today, as you guys can see, we're going to talk a little bit about Black Lives Matter. And this comes about, shout out to Benjamin for the Cash App, much appreciated. This comes about because there was an exchange that happened not too long ago with a good brother of mine and one of the leaders in Black Lives Matter. And this was on the Roland Martin show. Now, I'll probably play clips of it, but I might have to, blur out the clips after the live, and maybe I'll leave the live version on Patreon so you guys can kind of, revisit it. But it was an incredible exchange, right, that took place. And I think Torraine Walker, journalist, he's been on the show a couple of times, did a fabulous job of actually, articulating what many Black men have been saying for years, but haven't had the mic put in our face to do so. So I'm going to go ahead and actually bring the brother in and have him fully introduce himself. Let me go ahead and bring him up. What's up, good brother?
What's good, Dr. Johnson? How are you?
Oh man, I'm always good when I read one of your pieces, watch one of your videos. Shout out to Torraine Walker. Make sure you support both his YouTube channel and go to his Twitter account and check out what he's doing. The brother is fierce. Introduce yourself to him, to the audience again. Tell us what you do.
Well, hey everybody, my name is Torraine Walker. I'm a writer, I'm a journalist, I'm a content creator. I'm also basically I call myself a digital storyteller. I try to tell stories of our people across any platform I can. I'm also the founder of Context Media Group. And it's a pleasure to be back on your show, man.
Hey man, it seems to me that you're keeping a tradition alive. I think the term used to be journalist. Is that the right pronunciation? I may not be saying the word right. It seems like an ancient term. I don't even know if it's still in use, but you seem to have the tradition of it, and you still seem to practice it with some degree of honor. What do you think about this field of journalism, where it's gone today versus what you've been doing?
Ooh, that's a heavy question. And yeah, unfortunately, sometimes I do get the feeling that journalism is a dead language, but it is still out there. As far as the field of journalism, we have to start with like traditional journalism or quote unquote mainstream journalism. And in my opinion, mainstream journalism pretty much is PR at this point. PR and quote unquote what it used to be called journalism are interchangeable at this point. You got to go to the ground to get real journalism, whether it's some brother on the block with a phone or somebody who's just not afraid. That's where you got to go for journalism. Alternative places, people like you, people like what I try to do. That's where journalism is, but it's pretty much dead in large buildings.
Wow. Yeah, it used to be the hallmark was you got training at a specific place and then you got hired at a huge newspaper and you had a budget and you traveled and you really tried to excavate stories that that made the institutions quiver, made them scared. Now, like you said, you're talking about individual people with phones, right? It's really kind of broken down to almost, the individual's capacity and willingness to sacrifice to tell the truth, as opposed to it being something supported by larger institutions. Is that the case, or am I missing something?
In a large amount of time, in a large amount of places, yeah, that's true. The focus of journalism used to be, well, it always has been speaking truth to power. That's what it's there for, to be a check against the fourth estate, to be a check against power, whether it's government power or whether it's corporate power. Ever since 1994, when corporations started buying up journalism and started buying up newspapers and TV stations, what you're getting is basically recycled corporate narratives, and you're getting a lot of content that reinforces what corporations want news outlets to say. So you're not getting that anymore. The only way you can do that is from outside. There are people inside who want to do that work, but they're very quiet and they can't really speak out against that, or they'll get put out.
Okay. And I'm seeing the same thing in the academy. I mean, it's just gotten to a point where the kind of scholars I grew up on are few and far between. And now it's a matter of saying whatever you can that makes you interesting, but not something that might get you fired. So there's a very kind of thin line, and now, and a staunch culture of performing to, to whatever base will pay you, as opposed to actually having something to say that may go against the grain. And you've been an ardent critic of the academy as well, particularly, the Black Academy, as it were, as far as what professors in particular, what scholars are willing to say and what they're not. Can you tell the audience a little bit about that work, that kind of work you've been doing for some years now?
Okay, and I'll try not to be over long, but if you go back to the history from the 1970s, when you started seeing like people who were moving in, when college campuses began to get more integrated, a lot of that first wave of scholars who went into the academy came out of the student nonviolent tradition, or they came out of the Black radical tradition, which was basically either self-educated or they were in very small HBCUs. And what happened was they began to radicalize some of the students who were non-Black on these campuses, and that put the fear of God in the system. So what they did was the system itself began to like uplift, or for lack of a better term, began to endorse certain scholars who happen to be Black. That don't mean that they were Black scholars. They just were academics who happened to be Black. And what you got was a shifting, and you got a sort of a dilution of the Black radical tradition and the Black centered tradition into all these different strains like feminism or gender identity and all these things that are not, I'm not trying to say that they're not valid fields, but so much of Black content got filtered into that till a unified Black struggle and a unified Black idea of Black thought got completely diluted with that up until the 1980s was sort of like the last gasp of that. And by the mid 90s, it was pretty much done. And that's where we are now. And that's why a lot of theories that you see floating around in Black academic circles get so much credence right now, because nobody's there to challenge it.
Now, there's something similar that I think has been happening with protests. And I think it's actually very much tied to the academy as well, because a lot of the theories and ideas out of the academy in the 80s have popped up in the future, in the following generations now, right? And so we're seeing some of that. So here's an example, and I think this was off your Twitter page, of some of the current state of activism. And I wonder if you could kind of talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing here. But let me see. So here we go.
Fuck it up, sis. 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 I love it. 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 Yes, baby. Yes. Yeah. How does it feel knowing no one wants to fuck you? That is beautiful. Yes, sir. That's the middle finger, bitch. Yes, sir. It's my Black ass. Yes, sir. Y'all love it.
So
How does it feel?
This is in some respects. There are plenty of different examples we could pull, but I think there's something interesting about this that I really wanted to get your thoughts about in regard to the state of activism and your assessment, because I think, and we're going to see a little bit of this later, there are assumptions out there that this is the front lines. And unless you are out on the street, holding a sign or twerking in front of police officers, you're somehow not relevant. Give us your thoughts on the state of activism and how that, what you kind of engage as far as that.
Well, first of all, I want to thank that sister for continuing activism in the tradition of Rosa Parks. I don't know where we'd be without sisters like that on the front line. It's interesting because that is a prime example of what passes for activism right now. It's heavy because there's this idea that the revolution of the deed that came out of Marxist theory can be translated into this idea that anything you do that upsets cultural norms, or anything that is transgressive, qualifies as revolution or qualifies as protest. That is very much a sexual protest. That is very much a protest against societal norms, but it has absolutely nothing to do with why Black people were out in the streets for the past 4 to 5 years. But because there are no people who are connected to this real struggle out there who are able to kind of guide these things, and the people who are moving in front of the cameras and who guide the struggle, unfortunately, right now, go along with that sort of stuff, that is considered legitimate protest. And if you push back against that, then something's wrong with you. Something's wrong with that.
Right.
That's where we are.
Right. And the argument also seems to be that if that's not your site of activism, that not only is there something wrong with you, but you're not really contributing to the quote unquote struggle. You know, and this is why I started this interview with an appreciation for your approach to journalism. Because if you look at, look historically, journalism, even the activists of key people in the legal tradition, in the judicial tradition, these things, there were multiple levels and areas of activism that were not just tied to holding signs in the streets, getting in cameras and yelling. It wasn't just about that, right? But we've seemed to get to this point where that's become the sole defining, kind of venture in terms of what's considered activism and what isn't. And there's definitely somebody that I think you and I both appreciate, or at least appreciated, even after his death, who tried to push somewhat along those lines, coming from a very grassroots standpoint. Let's check him out.
I'm not with no organization. I represent the streets, the ones who out there fighting and dying every day. When Mike Brown was just a young boy laying on the streets dead, he didn't get none of this. Half of y'all didn't even come support him. It was the streets. CNN didn't care. Listen, when Mike Brown was just a young man laying in the streets dead for 4 hours, it was me, a couple other faces out here, and that's it. Wasn't no CNN, wasn't no Jesse, wasn't no Al, wasn't none of that. We gotta start valuing black lives. Value these young men. They the next presidents, the next governors, the next mayors, and y'all write them off. The elders, they don't even respect us how they should. We respect our elders, but respect us too, love us too. We the after crack era. We the AC generation, after crack. Our fathers left us. Our fathers left us. We are the monster y'all created when y'all left those homes and let the women raise us. The mothers raised us. I love these women out here. I represent these women out here. I'm gonna tell y'all something. All of this cameras and light don't mean nothing. Guess what? Cause when all the fame gone, CNN ain't coming us no more, it's us out there gonna be fighting and dying every day how it started. So respect us, love us, unite with us, cause we're gonna be on that front line dying. We all Mike Brown, we Mike Brown. The elders ain't Mike Brown, they not gonna kill you, they'll kill us. We need some type of economical freedom for these people. I'm gonna wrap it up. This must be said. This must be said. I'm gonna need everybody out here. This is my idea. Let's play a community ties. Like I pay 10% at church. If everybody out here will pay 5% of everything they own and put it into a joint account, and I started, I make $1,000 a week. I pay $100. I pay $50 every week into an account, so we can build some jobs for these same young men that's dying for y'all every day. That's what we need. Economical freedom. Quit spending the black dollars out of the black neighborhood. Because every time you spend $1 out of our neighborhood, they become richer and we become poor.
Okay. So now this is interesting because he's not only and he consistently drops truth. If you're not familiar with Darren Seals, I don't know what kind of rock you've been under, but look him up. You can catch plenty of video clips of him right here on YouTube. He's had a lot to say. The brother was on point. But even in this, in him advocating for the women in the community, I found it interesting, which groups talked about him, especially upon his death, in a very interesting way. Most particularly the intersectional feminists, that really just dismissed him as, a misogynist and this and that. And yet here you have him raw, uncut, and advocating for a community on a variety of levels. What are your thoughts on Darren Seals and, this whole question of activism?
Man, first of all, man, thank you for sharing that clip. And before I get started, man, I got to say this. One of my greatest regrets as a journalist was not interviewing that brother when I had the chance. I didn't really understand where he was coming from at first because I got caught up in this idea that the people who were speaking were the people who I needed to listen to.
Yes.
And I just saw him pop up on Twitter every now and then, and he was the first person that I saw basically ringing that alarm, saying that, yo, this is not what you think is going on is not what's going on. And I kind of ignored it because his language was real cool. I won't say coarse, but it was real rough. It was real direct. Mm-hmm. And by the time I started really paying attention to what he was saying and getting through some of the directness of it, and I was getting ready to start to reach out to him, man, he was gone.
Yeah.
So shout out, much respect to that brother Darren Seals and his family and his people. But to answer your question, man, that energy right there, the things he was saying and the energy that he put out, put the fear of God in a lot of people, and not just white people. I'm gonna say that like this. What happened in Ferguson could not have happened if brothers like that were not moved out of the way one way or another. I'll say that.
Okay.
If he had been allowed to have the platform he deserved to have, a lot of the things we're dealing with now with this confusion in a lot of these movement spaces would not be happening. I know, I really feel that. But to answer your question, I feel like for people to really get to the core of where we are when it comes to like protests and what legitimate protest looks like, you got to talk to the people on the ground. And Darren Seals represented people on the ground. It doesn't matter whether you're in Ferguson, whether you're in Baltimore, whether you're in Baton Rouge, whether you're in Atlanta, it doesn't matter where you are. There are always people who are not in front of the camera who are actually doing work, or they've had their back pushed against the wall till they're ready to stand on their feet and move things. You can respond to that 1 or 2 days. You can let them speak, give them the opportunity to speak, or if you're afraid of what they're saying, you try to ease them out of the way so you can take over the microphones that they've already built. And I think that's what happened. And I think that's where protest, and I think that's where activism, quote unquote, is right now with us. And it's sad.
Yeah. Especially when you factor in how he died and how a very small number of other brothers died in the movement. And when you talk about death in regard to BLM, those are the stories that come up, but somehow they're still not leading stories for some reason. But Seals and a number of other black males were found dead in questionable circumstances. I believe they were murdered. And I think it had a lot to do with the truth that they were putting out there that folks didn't want. But I do need to say this as well for the brothers who are watching this. Torraine, if you go to his YouTube channel, has done a brilliant video on the origins of the manosphere, as well as a number of different things in regard to black men. There's something you and Hood Scholar did together a while back, advocating for fathers. And this is something that I think goes along with where I want to take this as we watch some of these upcoming video clips. You advocate for black men in a way that we don't hear about in media. The work you did, really bringing forth black, the fathers of victims to police violence. Can you talk a little bit about that before we delve into some of this Roland Martin interview?
Yeah, that was an initiative that I was invited out to Ferguson by Dr. Hood Scholar. It was basically a roundtable for black men who've lost their sons to police violence. First of all, I was really honored that they thought of me to bring me out there. So I came out there and I basically met a lot of these brothers. There was Mike Brown Sr., some of the brothers whose names I won't get all together, Oscar Grant's family, people, pretty much all the young black men that you've seen and stories you've heard about over the past few years. The reason for that was because a lot of men who have dealt with this grief and dealt with this pain have been given a short shrift by media. You've seen so much attention on black women, mothers, and that's deservedly so. But most of these black boys and black men who've died have fathers as well. And a lot of these men were active in their lives, and they're going through some of the same pain and some of the same trauma that these mothers have, but there was just no focus on that. So I went out there, and I think that was some of the most powerful, and it was also some of the hardest journalism that I've ever done, to chair this panel and hear these black men talk about the grief that they deal with every day, knowing that a lot of their namesakes, and that's the other thing too, a lot of these men, their sons were named after them, and they had to see their sons ripped out of this life and ripped out of this existence, and see a part of you completely destroyed and removed from this earth. And you're dealing with that pain with no recompense. You're dealing with that pain with nobody to really talk to about that. And hearing those stories, man, and hearing how these people deal with that and these men, it was a lot to deal with. But I'm glad I was able to do that. But the sad thing about it is I shouldn't have had to be the only person to go out there to gather these men together to have this conversation.
Right.
It should be happening on a regular basis. But that's what happens when you're a black man. We're seen as not having any kind of real feelings. We're seen as not having any kind of internal monologue that needs to be dealt with, any kind of physical, psychological trauma. And it's sad, man. It was a heavy thing, but I'm glad to do it.
Absolutely. Shout out to you on that. And again, support Torraine Walker's channel. Check out his work. Check out what he's been doing. Now, tell us a little bit how this interview on Roland Martin came about. What was this about?
Well, the interview came about because I was invited to be on Roland's show.
Mhm.
And it was supposed to be about just the regular topics, police misconduct, voting, electoral politics, politics in general, and just culture. And while we're in the middle of the show, there was supposed to be me and a few other guests on. One of them, I think, dropped out, and then an alert went out on our phones to say we're going to get another guest that's coming in, and we're going to be talking about BLM and the controversy and some of the suits flying around about BLM and the leadership.
Okay.
I thought it was just going to be just a monologue where we all chopped it up, and then it turned out that one of the people who used to be connected to the BLM leadership was going to be on there. I didn't know that, and when I saw that, I literally saw it as we were going on. And that scene in the Ten Commandments where Pharaoh tells Moses to get your people and go, and Moses starts talking about the Lord has delivered my people into my hand.
Okay.
I was like, man, look. So when we went live, I'm sitting over here jumping like this. I'm like, okay, all right, I'm ready. And so when we went live and the camera went to me, I went off completely with no notes. I went off the dome with what I had to say, because the questions I had were questions I've had for years. And there were questions that people who have been part of that group, a part of that organization, and been kicked to the curb or been just left on read for basically years had. So I just asked straight up, what's going on with the donations y'all receive? How come there seems to be so much disarray in the leadership? How come people who have risked their freedom and their lives, how come they can't get any sort of understanding, or they can't get any answers when they ask what's going on? How come there's no support?
Right.
And if you go and look at the video, you can see I got a bunch of answers that didn't really answer the question. And I had to ask the same question like 2 times before before they had debunked the segment. So that's pretty much what it was. I just went off the dome with, things people wanted to say, questions I had, and I just let the people speak, and I let people make their own decisions on what they got.
But that was the coldest part about it, because you really feel like over the years there's been a kind of barrier when it comes to mainstream media in terms of how organizations like BLM are even questioned publicly. And so when you came at it the way you did, to me it felt like you were speaking for a lot of people who've never been able to be in the space in a public setting to ask those questions and put those ideas on the table. It's like they've been protected from having to address those kind of things. So I'm gonna pull up the first clip of this. We'll just kind of walk through it.
Conversation for a while. We're 9 years deep into this now. Ever since Ferguson started, there were brothers like Darren Seals and people who were on the ground who would call out some of these things, and he got silenced. There were people who were close to the people who were connected to the ground who talked about these issues, and they either got silenced or they either got marginalized or pushed completely out the way. Nobody said anything. And all of a sudden, after people in other cities have said had these conversations as well, again, nobody said anything. Nobody had anything to say until all of a sudden the story came out about $90 million and nobody said anything about, and people saw houses and mansions getting built. So my question is, what's happening now to make people so upset about the leadership that people weren't listening to 9 years ago? And what's happening today?
Fair use.
Sure. So we're actually stepping into 10 years. Black Lives Matter was birthed July 13th, 2013, which is the day that George Zimmerman was acquitted in the murder of Trayvon Martin. So we've been doing this work. People like me who've been on the ground since day one, who were people who were in Ferguson, who were people who were in, Baltimore and Los Angeles and all of the places that you saw uprising, right? Who were people who were just regular folks. I'm just a mama. I'm a mama of 3 kids. I never took a check, right? We've been saying things, but also I think more importantly, we viewed Black Lives Matter as a movement. So I've been less vocal about what's been happening inside of Black Lives Matter that I frankly have nothing to do with. I don't know about I do now, but at the time, I didn't know anything about dollars coming in or about, who's getting paid what. My concern and what I felt to be my sacred duty was to do work that makes the world safer for my children. And so when you're talking about people saying things, I think people were saying things, but more importantly, I think that the people, the boots on the ground, were most concerned with doing something.
Okay, here's the second part of that. There's 3 clips.
Standing the historical record that it's from the inside that movements most often destroy themselves or are destroyed. And so it was important to me and many, many others that we continue to do the work and not allow fights from the inside to destroy a movement.
But I hear what you're saying, but my point is this. I understand that there's going to be disagreements. There's going to be situations where people have differences of opinion on how a movement works. I'm saying that the conversations that you're having now, people inside of the movement who broke away from the movement have had these conversations for like the past 5 to 6 years. And there was no real movement from the inside to have these conversations. It was like either marginalize these people, shut them up, keep it moving, and nobody said anything. So my question again is, how come it takes something like outside people coming in, like the New York Times and all these quote unquote non-Black information portals, to be able to have the conversation instead of going to the people who believe in Black Lives Matter and saying, this is what's going on, this is what we're dealing with, this is what we're about, instead of waiting for it to happen from the outside. You hear what I'm saying?
Okay, last clip.
It's my position as someone who is just boots on the ground. You know, now I'm director of Black Lives Matter Grassroots, and I am boots on the ground, right? My concern is about the struggle rather than exposing. I don't want to spend a lot of time focusing on what infrastructures look like when our people are literally being gunned down in the streets. And so the focus hasn't been where are the criticisms coming from. It doesn't mean that we've ignored criticisms. There have been all kinds of tables created and conversations created and weekly calls created to address what you're talking about. But my primary work, and for many of us, I'm thinking about Mama Paula and the Josephs and people like Marquel Bridges, our primary work is really doing the work rather than simply addressing criticisms of the way the work is moving.
What I'm trying to get you to understand is this. People from the outside, and let me preface it by saying this. My background is in journalism. I was writing for Huffington Post when all this stuff was going on. I was in Ferguson. I was in some of these cities. I saw this stuff up close. When you have people who are risking their lives and risking their freedom to go ahead and protest for Black people and Black lives, and then all of a sudden when something happens to them, or they end up getting years in prison, like someone like Josh Williams in Ferguson, or you see people who are actually getting injured when people are getting shot in the eye with beanbag bullets and things like this, and they look for somebody to bring aid to them, or they're looking for somebody to deal with legal aid to get them out of prison, or legal aid or hospital to take care of their bills, and they're risking everything. And they see people pulling in $90 million off the death of a Black man who died in the street. 2 of them actually, Michael Brown and George Floyd, and they see millions, hundreds of $90 million at least that we know of coming into an organization, and then we don't hear anything when they want accountability, and these people are still struggling. And then the next thing you know, we see people dancing in the street, and we see them popping champagne on a mansion in front of on the desk at a mansion. You have to understand that's a disconnect between people who are living hand in mouth but still believe in Black lives, and the people who are supposed to be the leadership for these organizations. And then when you try to get answers, nobody says anything. That's the point I'm trying to make. There's a serious disconnect.
Now, that was fire. That was absolute fire. I had not seen BLM held to task in any major platform, especially to that degree. Give us your thoughts watching that at this point. What does that bring to mind for you?
Oh man, you know what? This is the first time I've watched that whole clip in a few days. All those clips together. I didn't even realize that I was just flowing like that. I did not. I had no notes. Like I said, it got sprung on me 5 minutes beforehand, and I just let everything flow out of me. The questions that I had, and I don't have too much to say about what I said because I don't think I did anything wrong. I just asked the questions everybody has. What was interesting, after I gave her 3 or 4 chances to answer the question, I never, in my opinion, I feel like I didn't really get any straight answers for anything, which is why I kept hitting it over and over. And I was trying to make her understand how people from the outside feel about this. I'm glad I did it. I'm glad that that's out there so people can pay attention to it and they can maybe get an understanding of what they're dealing with. But I really wish, honestly, I wish I would have gotten better answers. That's really what I wish I would have gotten out of all that.
Well, I've talked about on this channel, when BLM did reveal where some of that money went to, what I noticed in their reports was that very little of that went to chapters that had most particularly heterosexual Black males involved in the leadership. Very few of them did. I literally went through and showed the actual reports of where that money went, to the extent that it was made, transparent. So that was one of my issues, and I think part of what you said kind of challenged them on multiple levels, including some of the elements like that. That's one of the reasons I appreciated what you said, because again, you're bringing these elements to the source, and you're challenging, this question of how BLM is functioned. Because I think in many ways, what we're seeing here wasn't just a kind of verbal back and forth between a journalist and an activist. What I saw was you actually putting the agenda of Black men being used and profited off of on the table. And on top of that, you're also challenging a style of activism that became popular in 2014 and 2015, most particularly after the death of Michael Brown. It became popular, and so many of us, it took us a while to catch up and really figure out what was going on, right? I mean, when I first heard of BLM, it was really at the death of Michael Brown. And honestly, I didn't know it was an organization. You know what I mean? Because I heard it chanted in the street. So I thought it was just because the chant went from hands up, don't shoot to Black Lives Matter. You know what I mean? And so in the protest that I was involved in, even here in Fresno, that's what I heard. I heard it went from hands up, don't shoot. Then it was just black. So I thought Black Lives Matter was just the chant. And then when I found out it was an organization, again, I didn't think much of it. I just thought, okay, it's another organization, that it is what it is. It was only when I started to really look at the video and the clips and the interviews taking place in Ferguson, where I started to see this ground shift, right, of who was being interviewed, who was allowed to speak for the organization, who was securing donations for the organization, and less of it was going to those on the ground. And this is something that I've talked about with Nyota Uhura, who I've had on the show, who's an on-ground activist in Ferguson. And she talked about this at length. I've had her on the show a couple times, and she talked about how they kind of usurped this. She was right there with Darren Seals talking about that kind of process. And so it started to make more sense. And then that's when I was, your brother named Marshall, shout out to Marshall, sent me some Darren Seals clips. And I was like, oh, so Darren ended up cementing, some of the things that I was suspicious of, you know what I mean? And it kind of went from there. I'm still surprised how much of that discussion, it doesn't get, doesn't really reach the light of day, as it were. And so that's what I think, I saw going on in that interview. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. The way you laid it out is absolutely right. When I first became aware of the killing of Mike Brown, and when I first saw the protests that erupted in Ferguson, if you go back and look, the first thing you saw before you saw any sort of chants at all were people going head to head with the cops there. That's when you saw like the images that have become cemented in the public mind about Ferguson. Brothers like Martian picking up the tear gas with the sparks flying out of it and throwing it back. People, basically snatching the mic from CNN and basically cussing out Don Lemon and people like that because they wanted to get their story out. Once that became known to the public, then you started hearing the chants like hands up, don't shoot, which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, was Darren Seals, the group that he was part of. Were the people who were marching up on the police with their hands up, basically going hands up, don't shoot. Those are the very first images I saw. Then like you said, it began to move into Black Lives Matter. And as you said, people thought it was a chant. What I think happened was the people who were on the ground in Ferguson were poor and working class people. They were hustlers. They were 9-to-5 people. They were blue collar people. They were people who live hand to mouth. You know what I mean? They're trying to get through every week. They're trying to pay their rent every month. They're trying to focus on that. This pulled them out of their element, and this pulled them out of themselves to get into something bigger than them. And I don't even think they realized how big it was going to be. But the people who did realize how big it was going to be were the people who swooped into Ferguson maybe like a couple months later, after it became a sustained protest and it became nightly news and it became an everyday thing. And it looked like it was going to become not just a protest, but the beginnings of a revolution. That's when you started seeing people who began to grab the mic at CNN and in these major outlets who were far more polished than Darren Seals and like Sister Nyota and people like that, who were just raw, straight off the cuff, off the dome. That scared the hell out of people sitting in their living rooms watching the TV. So what they had to do was grab people who were a lot more polished, a lot more milquetoast. That's how you saw people who were showing up and they were able to articulate these things in academic terms and shift the conversation away from the anger of the people on the ground to the academic think tank sort of speak that makes people feel comfortable and makes academics feel comfortable and makes white liberals feel comfortable.
Right.
And the people who were doing that were absolutely not the people who started that protest.
Yeah.
So that's what happened. And that's how the conversation began to shift away from police brutality and institutionalized racism into these ideas about gender and these ideas about sex and about who should lead and who deserves to lead. And that's what happened. And that's what happens every time.
Tell me, as a journalist, when did the money part of it really hit your desk? Like, when did you become aware that there's a question to be asked about these donations?
When I started really paying attention to it was not in Ferguson. It was in Baton Rouge after Alton Sterling got killed.
Uh-huh.
When Alton Sterling was killed, that was the first time you started seeing some of the energy from Ferguson or from the Black Lives Matter organization begin to move into different cities and everything. Because at the time, I thought Black Lives Matter was a Ferguson-based movement.
Okay.
When I saw some of the people who had sort of made their name in Ferguson started showing up in Baton Rouge, and let me preface that by saying this first. I first paid attention to that because some of the people who got prominent off of Ferguson were people who I was talking to on a regular basis because I was still filing stories in for Huffington Post, and I was trying to reach out to them so I could get the inside information because I thought they were the people who were leading these movements. Some of the people who I was used to in Ferguson showed up in Baton Rouge, and this was after I had spoken to people in Baton Rouge who were doing grassroots work. And some of these people had specifically said, we don't want anybody from outside coming in because we want to keep this a Baton Rouge-based movement because we can tell our story better than anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And I know for a fact that conversation went back to some of the people in Ferguson and some of the people who had made their name there. And there was sort of a conscious decision for people in St. Louis to not go, let Baton Rouge handle their thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a protest that happened in Baton Rouge on a Saturday night. And there was a live stream that went out on that protest. And the live stream was done by people who I saw got prominent in Ferguson.
Mm.
And there were people like your man in the blue vest. There were people like a couple of these women who made their name in Ferguson who were leading and walking with a cell phone. And I'm thinking to myself, how are these people in Ferguson?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody else is doing anything and they're leading this protest.
Mm-hmm.
And they were specifically told not to show up there. So then the question began, how did they get out there?
Mm-hmm.
Then the question began, who funded that?
Mm-hmm. All right.
And that's when I started looking at, if you're a grassroots activist and I was out there and I saw how people were living, you don't have jet plane money, at least as far as I know. So how did you show up there? Who did that? And then that's when everything went over, when the arrest happened. And then that's when it became national news. And then the world media picked it up. And that's when I really started getting my eyebrow raised.
Now, I've always been of the position that you have a grassroots movement of people that want to see change. And then you have this organization of people who were a bit savvy with nonprofits. They were a bit savvy at setting up paperwork. You know what I mean? And I think, we're able to come in and on a professional white collar level, absorb some of the discussion, absorb a lot of the resources. But, I do want to differentiate between the two. In essence, if we were going to, really water it down or boil it down, the difference between BLM, the organization, and the movement of people that wanted to see change. Do you make that differentiation yourself?
Oh, I do. Absolutely. I say it all the time. And this is something that I say sometimes to people, and I say it in a joking way, but it's serious. Black lives matter, but the organization doesn't. And what that means is the concept of Black Lives Matter, that you are a Black human being. You deserve to have life. You deserve to go about your day. You deserve to go through life and live out your life unattacked, unmolested, and not having your skin color be the deciding factor on whether you live or you die because of state power. That's a real thing that matters. However, we have to talk about something that I know is an academic called language capture. It's where you take a term that may be neutral, and then you add meaning to it that completely changes the meaning of the original neutral term. Okay. So in the mind of the public, the idea of Black Lives Matter is inextricably tied to that organization. And if you say that term, your mind automatically makes the link that saying Black Lives Matter means you support that organization. Right. And it was really genius marketing from a branding standpoint, because if you push back against the idea of Black Lives Matter in the mind of the public, in the collective mind of the public, it makes it seem like you're saying that you don't believe that Black people deserve to live and Black people do not deserve to have productive lives and live out their lives. I mean, it's genius. It's genius, but it's frightening, because if you push back against the organization, like I said, those two ideas are so intertwined that they're almost impossible to extricate from each other at this point. So yeah, while I agree that absolutely there are grassroots people who deserve to be supported, in the mind of the public, again, anything that looks like it's supporting a pushback against police brutality or a pushback against white supremacy and anti-blackness, in their mind assumes that they think it's part of Black Lives Matter. And because of all the stuff that's going on with that organization, it makes people hesitant to support anybody because there's no way to sort it out.
Yeah, I saw you made a statement about that on Twitter a while back, and you were actually saying your concern was how this whole situation with Black Lives Matter, and we'll get into their finances in a little bit, but how that was going to affect organizations on the ground who really do need support and are advocating for people beyond, this just kind of abusive use of black male death, for profit. And that brings us to this whole other element of BLM that few anticipated. Like I said earlier, many of us, by the time we found out it was an organization, it was kind of like, okay, I think many assumed it was in the tradition of the NAACP, a number of other organizations that, had a general stance on the uplift of Black community. But, then we started to see this gender dynamic that I don't think we'd ever seen, really happen on this scale when it came to an organization that was really jumping into this conversation about police homicide, most particularly of Black men. And that's one of the things I appreciated about how you handled this interview. You put it on the table. This wasn't an arbitrary, police killing Black people. You talked specifically about Black men. And then you identified the key Black men where we saw, these huge blowups in terms of activism. I was glad you put that on the table because people kind of try to gender wash that and just really kind of downplay the fact that it was Black men. And BLM has done a lot of that too. But going further, we started to see this hostility toward Black men, most particularly straight Black men, not only in the organization, but even in terms of the rhetoric. And then it's these whole statements that Black men would report coming out from BLM, at least, under the table, not in the national eye, where you couldn't take a leadership position. I've interviewed brothers who led chapters of BLM, heterosexual Black men who were not recognized by the primary, base organization. Any thoughts about this kind of hostile gender kind of element of it that we had not seen really take place in an organization that was supposedly advocating for Black lives? Any thoughts about that dimension of it?
Oh, I got thoughts. And I also got to preface it with a story.
Okay.
I first got my eyebrow raised about that during a strategy meeting that happened. I guess it had to be around 2017. Mm-hmm. And this was in Atlanta. This was there was some turmoil and there was some tension going on in Atlanta between the quote unquote official Black Lives Matter chapter and another chapter that apparently had taken on the name of Black Lives Matter Greater Atlanta, if I'm not mistaken. There were two separate chapters, but they were at odds with each other in the city. And one of the women who became known nationally as one of the three Black women who founded Black Lives Matter flew into the city, I guess, to basically clear out some things. And she made a comment that struck me as very odd, because she came to basically clear up, in her words, to clear up some of the misconceptions about the organization. She said quite a few things, but one thing that stuck out to me was that she said, I want to clear up the idea that Black Lives Matter is an organization that's trying to push men out of the limelight of leadership. And she said, well, that part is kind of true in a little bit. And she kind of said it in a joking way. And some of the people laughed, but I was back in the cut like this. This is what, and I don't really have a poker face, which is why I don't play poker that much. But I didn't say anything, but I heard that, and I didn't, it kind of struck me. It kind of struck me as like an off note, like you're listening to a symphony and somebody made a bad note. So after the conversation was over, I went over and I spoke to her, and I was getting ready to ask her about that.
Right.
And you ever see somebody you try to talk to, and you look into their eyes and it feels like there's no there.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like you're having a conversation, but they're not.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was just a very strange energy. And I couldn't get any straight answers. And apparently that seems to be a trend. But I couldn't get any definite answers. And it was sort of like a very, very strange conversation. So I left it alone. But anyway, that was when I first started paying attention to that. And then as time went on, I started looking at some of the things that showed up on their platform. And I started looking at how some of the messaging and some of the chapters and some of their messaging just from their site and from their outreach started saying, it stopped being Black Lives Matter. Then it slowly became to be all Black Lives Matter.
Mm.
And then it became this thing where it was like, you know, all lives matter, not all lives matter, but gender non-conforming and everybody else's life matters, which is again true. But the tone of that movement began to shift from focusing on policy against police brutality and policy against white supremacist policing into all these ideas around gender and who deserves to lead and who does not deserve to lead, who needs to be in front, and all these sorts of things. And it became more focused on, depending on your gender identity, that's who deserves to lead outside of your skill set and outside of your capability. And let me say that by saying this: if you have a skill set, if you have a talent that puts you into a leadership position, or you have something that you can contribute to a movement, I personally don't give a damn what your gender identity is. If you're a Black man and you're competent, if you are a gender non-conforming person and you're competent, if you're a woman and you're competent and you know what you're doing, I really don't give a damn who's out front. But to completely exclude a group of men and a group of people because they happen to be cishet men and cishet Black men from being in a leadership role, something's clearly off with that, and something that needs to be addressed. So to give you all, I gave you all that backstory to tell you that was the first time I saw that 2017, and then I just watched how things began to progress.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely the case, and again, this is why I want to keep highlighting the role of the academy in this, because a lot of this kind of evolved out of intersectional feminism, intersectional Black feminism. Intersectionality as a concept, it kind of evolved out of that into this kind of language where Black men in particular were being retroactively historically punished for these kind of perceived deeds in the past, and now it's women and LGBT that need to take leadership, and Black males, heterosexual Black males needed to be silent. They needed to stand on the side. They needed to take follow leadership. This was actually a piece I did some years ago. And I'm not going to read through it, but I will put the link up for you guys to see it. But this is a piece I did on my blog. This was probably, this is October 2nd, 2017. I call it Silly Rabbit Tricks Are for Kids. BLM was not for you after all. And this is interesting because when you actually see, there's an article that you can kind of look up yourself. I have the link right there. I won't go to it now. I wasn't planning to do this, but you can check it out for yourself. But the quote I pulled out of this article came from Opal Tometi, one of the founders of BLM. She said, contrary to the widely held misconceptions that Black Lives Matter was founded solely for men or boys, Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and I created Black Lives Matter for Black women. Now, the last time I went to look at the article that this was sourced out of, that quote had been removed, right? But this was around the time when I started to hear more people talking about the whole kind of image of the Black nuclear family as far as the BLM website and their kind of identification with this new idea of family, this new idea that was supposed to usurp what we'd grown familiar with and was supposed to, take on this whole different bent. I don't know if are you familiar with that whole discussion?
Yeah. I think at one point there was, if you went to the Black Lives Matter organization website, there was a section in their mission statement that said one of their goals is to disrupt the idea of the nuclear family.
Right.
I don't have the verbatim statement in front of me, but I do know that once people began to question that statement, it got removed from the site. I think it might have been Joy Reid or somebody who mentioned that, and it got pulled down.
It got pulled down, right?
Yeah, my thoughts on that are this: this whole idea of Black men being patriarchs and being dominant in movement spaces. In the modern day, and I don't think a lot of people know this, but you have to trace all this back to a book called The Dialectic of Sex by a feminist named Shulamith Firestone. Came out in 1972, if I'm not mistaken. And the most important part of that book is the 5th chapter, where she talks about Black masculinity and Black hegemony and Black families. That book and that chapter is sort of like a cornerstone book when it comes to the idea of Black patriarchy. And here's the interesting thing about this. Shulamith Firestone was a feminist who was and I'm probably going to make this mistake, usually at Princeton or Yale, I'm not sure which. Apparently, she went to a Black Panther rally in 72, someplace like that, one year. She went to a Black Panther rally, and she saw Black men in berets, the classic Black Panther gear, Black berets, Black leather jackets, holding shotguns and rifles and everything. And she got some literature. My guess is something about being in that space scared the hell out of her, or it made her feel some kind of way. And instead of engaging with those brothers to get into their philosophy, the fact that it made her feel some kind of way seeing these black men with guns made her feel like that black men want to emulate white male patriarchy, or trying to tie black men with weapons into the South, into this sort of like this phallic symbol, or sort of this surrogate phallus, which that had nothing to do with it. For black men, it was about survival and self-defense. And I think that's what happened. If you go to the fifth chapter of that book, you can read it for yourself.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people that filtered through the academy, and a lot of people who ended up going into black feminism used that book. People like Michelle Wallace, people like Bell Hooks, they read that book and they used that as sort of a template to craft their theories on. And I think that's why we got us to this point now, to the point where that theory that black men want to emulate white patriarchy has filtered through the academy into lay conversation, into academic spaces, and then into activist spaces, because a lot of people who control activist spaces come through the academy. And you were dealing with what, 2 generations of this sort of philosophy. So now here we are.
Yes. And you know, which speaks to why the academy is important to watch in regard to these kind of conversations, because it might be it might not take place for another generation, but these ideas don't come out of nowhere. Right? They don't fall out of the sky. They've actually been in motion for quite a while. And I'm glad you brought up Michelle Wallace, because her book Black Macho and the Myth of the Superwoman played an incredible role in this dynamic too. This kind of embedding of a certain hostility toward black men, even to the point where when she announced that, you know, this was not something like some of the stories she pulled about black men were not accurately reported on. She did a whole kind of push in the early 90s to really acknowledge that this was propped up in many ways. It wasn't based on factual information, which you even had black women sociologists pointing out when her book was on the stands, and yet people ignored that. A lot of that needs to be called into question, but it's rolled into so many other things that when I've talked to my students, sometimes when I've introduced and talked about Michelle Wallace, they don't even know who she is. You know what I mean? So it's interesting to see how this has come about. But going back to the interview, you know, you did with Roland Martin. Now, Roland Martin, right after that exchange, he called out this whole question of not holding other black organizations accountable when it comes to funding. You know, whereas you know, after you know this much time, I thought BLM, especially in terms of what's been revealed, deserved a little more analysis. Roland kind of deflected a bit and talked a little bit about other black organizations. You know, and then after that, one of the things I noticed was you got a response again, and I do believe this is directed at you, from Dr. Melina Abdullah, you know, who you engaged with. She had some things to say on Twitter, and I wanted to get your thoughts on it. So there are 2 short clips. Here's the first.
Than expected live is to say, you know, middle fingers to toxic men, because they're mostly men, who come at us and say that we can't eat cheese and olives and drink champagne like ever, right? Like, if you do, then you must not really believe in the movement, not really be about business, not really be about doing the work. And also, I want to question you. I ain't never seen you on no front line. You talking about it. You're a journalist. What do you do other than hop on Roland Martin and talk shit about people? Sorry, mama, that just came out. Talk stuff about people who are actually doing work. What do you do? Middle fingers to you. Middle fingers to you. I dare you to come out in the streets and say it to my face. I dare you, because you ain't never been in the streets. You talking about you were in Ferguson. Fool, I was in Ferguson. I was in Ferguson, and Ferguson was in 2014. That was 9 years ago. Where you at now, homie? I dare you to come out every Wednesday to the End Police Association's rally. I dare you to come out and say it to my face and see what happens. I dare you. I dare you. I'm not afraid of you and your Twitter following. Nobody's scared of you, right? Nobody. And that's toxic masculinity. I know toxic men hate to hear that term, but it's toxic masculinity. And you are a misogynist because the only people you drag, and I'm talking to all of y'all of your ilk, right? The only people you drag are women. You ain't said nothing to the NAACP, who raised way more money than Black Lives Matter ever did. You ain't saying nothing to Derek Johnson. right? You ain't saying nothing to the Urban League. You're not dragging any of the men who get paid six-figure salaries and fly in private jets. You only want to attack the black mamas who do the work and don't drag in big salaries. You should, what you're saying is, I never get to stop and drink. Forget you, middle fingers to you, and come and say it to my face and see what happens. See what happens if you come and say it to my face, right? You won't, because you don't believe in being on front lines. You just believe in being on Twitter. I bet you I'm stronger than your little Twitter thumbs. Bet you I'm stronger than your little Twitter thumbs.
Okay. So, while you respond to that, I want to kind of put something into perspective that I think you raised in your talk on Roland Martin. But go ahead and tell us, what are your responses to what you just heard?
Oh man. I guess she didn't see me in Ferguson because I was on the ground talking to people who were there. I don't know if she was in the Hilton or wherever she was, but maybe that's why she didn't see me. Also, yeah, true. Ferguson, Mike Brown died in 2014, but I've been to Ferguson in 2018, 2019, and 2021. Last time I was there, that was to host the Black Father Summit. And it's, you know what, man, I'm surprised that someone who's supposed to be an academic is talking that greasy. I never attacked that woman. I never called her out of her name. I never insulted her, at least in my opinion. But I guess in this day and times that we live in now, in this academic world, asking somebody direct questions is toxic masculinity. I guess that makes me Mr. from Color Purple, I guess. I don't know what kind of weird they're thinking. Or I guess me asking you what happened to, what's wrong with the leadership. That means I'm Bernie Mac from head of state, knocking people upside the head, getting off the train. I don't know where they think that from. I that's so wild, man, that it's hard for me to even figure out how to respond to that. I don't know. I don't know, man. What I can say is, as far as me going after people, I know not everybody may follow me on my social media, but I've been very vocal about these organizations, whether it's politicians, organizations who claim to be for us, whether it's the Congressional Black Caucus, whether it's the NAACP, whether it's the Urban League. I've talked about them, and I've critiqued people who try to make these statements where Black people feel like they're not getting what they say they're supposed to be getting or what they're supposed to be doing all the time. The difference is the NAACP, whether you agree with them or not, has solid leadership that you can go to if you have grievances. The Urban League and other organizations have a track record of people that you can go to, that you can reach out to if you have grievances. The Black Lives Matter organization is so convoluted that you don't know who is who and you don't know who is what, and they don't even have a definite plan of action about what they stand for you to even to redress your grievances to. And it's just wild her talking about come say it in her face. I don't know where that came from. I mean, I said it to your face on a national talk show and you didn't have anything to say. So why go on IG away from everybody else to do all this? And you still didn't answer the questions I asked. As far as this idea of Black women not being able to relax and eat cheese and drink champagne, sis, y'all can drink champagne and eat cheese wherever you want. I just think it's real funny to do that on a tombstone where people who are trying to figure out how to live can't do it anywhere else. The people who are on the ground don't have time to do that. They're trying to stay alive. You know what I mean? And that was on the 1 year anniversary of the George Floyd uprising. How much cheese did his family get to eat?
Wow.
In a mansion. So are you upset at me for asking the question? Or are you upset at everybody else for asking more?
Well, I gotta ask, since I have you, and these are subjects that you're far more aware of in terms of doing the research that you do. So we know that lately, right, there's been a whole conversation about Black Lives Matter going bankrupt, right? This is actually not the one I want. Hold on 1 second. I'm gonna pull up another one. But this whole question about bankruptcy, this whole question about the state of the affair, where the resources have gone. We know there's a lot of tumultuous kind of things going on within the organization. There's a lawsuit, of course, internal to the organization. I want to pull this up. All right. So this one is off of blackenterprise.com. Black Lives Matter on the brink of bankruptcy, called out for shady finances, right? This is May 26, 2023, right? You can see, here, it says tax documents show BLM's Global Network Foundation ended the financial year with $8,559,748 while still owing millions to organizers and relatives of co-founder Patrisse Cullors. The New York Post reports the filings highlight how the nonprofit recorded revenue of $8.5 million, more than half the $17 million the organization spent. And that, of course, is not addressing the full $90 million we're aware of post George Floyd and the questions that haven't been raised about how much was raised prior to that since Mike Brown. Any thoughts about any of this as far as Black Lives Matter's finances?
On that, man, I don't really know enough about that to be able to speak on it intelligently, so I won't say anything.
Okay.
What I will say is my focus is on the people on the ground and the people who have, put their blood, sweat, and bodies on the line with this. Those are the people who need answers even more than I do, because those are the people who have really risked everything. And I know for a fact that there are people who are still, living hand to mouth even today. As far as that particular situation, I don't know. I don't know enough about it to speak on it. And I don't think anybody knows enough. As far as I know, it's unfortunate, but beyond that, I got nothing on that.
Yeah. All right. I'm trying to understand it because this is something that, I haven't heard much about in my lifetime in terms of this much money, these types of resources. And then the question of how it was spent, and in terms of what we know, a lot of that was questionable. You mentioned the mansions earlier. It just was ridiculous to me. Now, coming out of, as the child of a Panther, knowing about, COINTELPRO and these kind of things, that would have been my first assumption. But then when you see the founders defending the purchases of mansions and whatnot, it just left a bad taste in people's mouths. And this is what I think made it that much more important that you were able to voice that publicly. What do you think this will do to activism going forward?
Oh man, you just asked a question that I've been getting quite a bit over the past couple of weeks. I think what happened is going to be extremely, extremely devastating to organizing, especially Black organizing in general, because of those things that we talked about earlier. In the public mind, any sort of Black protest against any sort of anti-Blackness is connected to the idea of the Black Lives Matter organization. So anybody who wants to donate or anybody who wants to support Black lives, I think the majority of people, because these stories are starting to come out, are going to be hesitant about that. Even if you're not even connected to that, even if your name isn't even tied to that organization per se, the public, in the public mind, they think anything that has to do with that is tied to that organization. And because there's been such a lack of transparency about what they've done, there's been such a lack of transparency with people who are even allied to the movement. That's going to make people who are very careful about where they spend their money. And it's also going to make people who are very careful about what they're seen supporting be very hesitant about supporting that. That's on the level of people who are going to work every day on their everyday lives. The second part of that is the people who are real big check writers, the people who can pull out $1 million and write a check and not think anything of it. I'm talking about like foundations and people who may even want to actually be altruistic when it comes to these situations are going to be very hesitant about how they open their purse strings, because the one thing that I do know from my time in working in corporate America is that the one thing you don't want to be seen as is to be seen as a fool or somebody who can be taken advantage of. And I guarantee you that a lot of people who work in these corporations, a lot of people who work in nonprofits, a lot of people in Hollywood, a lot of people in the entertainment industry who back that organization, they're starting to feel like they got played. They got sucked into a shell game. Remember that story that Dave Chappelle said on his IG when he did that IG special, when he talked about moving to DC and seeing somebody run a shell game, and he figured out where the P was. And he told everybody, and he got jacked up.
Yeah,
I guarantee you, a lot of people who are very influential feel that way. They feel like they saw where the P went and they got played.
Yeah,
that's going to make it very difficult for anybody to try to really raise grassroots level, organize it to a level to where they can really affect change. And I think that's the thing that is going to be the ultimate legacy of their organization, and that's where I think they've done the most damage. because in the public mind, they've set, in my opinion, I feel like they've set organizing for Black people back maybe 20 years. I feel,
Wow.
and that's tragic.
Based on your time, how much time do you have left? Do you have to go pretty soon, or where are you at with that?
No, I'm good. It's 8:20 on my end. I can roll till 9 if you want.
Okay. I want to give people an opportunity to post some questions for you, if they'd like, and as long as they're respectful, we can engage some brothers who might want to.
I'm gonna drink some OJ while you're waiting and stuff.
Okay. Well, I do have one question, so I'm putting the link in the chat. So if you have a question you want to pose, feel free to do it. But my question is this whole question of of the front lines, and I mentioned this earlier in the broadcast for a reason. This idea of what the front lines constitutes, and I think it's been really since. I mean, obviously we've been street protesting since before the civil rights movement, but I think there's something about the March on Washington that really kind of culminated into this kind of idea that's kind of agreed upon that is the front lines. That is the only front lines of importance, being on the street and so on and so forth. What are your thoughts about the front line as it pertains to the current moment? Do you think the street is the only front line or the only front line of relevance? What are your thoughts about what activism is going to mean going forward in terms of identifying the front line?
The front line is absolutely not the street protests. I think it's a very important component of the front line. And you're right. We have to figure out what the front line looks like. The front line, in my opinion, in the public mind, again, and I keep going back to the public mind because these are the things that people take in for the most part. The people who put their bodies on the line on frontline protests in the streets, they are very important, but it is not the only place where protests can take place. While things go, and if you look back at the history of public protests in America, even if you go back to the Boston Tea Party and you go back to the Boston attack where Crispus Attucks was the first Black person to get killed in a street protest, ironically, there's always been the level of public agitation and private negotiation. That's always happened. If you go back and if we bring it up to the 60s, while people were protesting in the streets in Selma and in Birmingham and voting with their feet and voting with their wallets, there were people like A. Philip Randolph and James Farmer and Martin Luther King who were having those street protests, but they were going into private chambers to negotiate with the white power structures to see what we can do to negotiate this movement to get some sort of concession so we won't disrupt things on the ground, or we'll disrupt in a different way. Now there's a lot of conversation you can have about was that fruitful or was that beneficial, but I'm saying that to say that protest takes place in a lot of different rooms. There's yelling on the street and then there's negotiations sitting face to face, and you have to have both of those. Sometimes it's having conversations away from the public, away from the news media, to where we can negotiate and try to figure out some sort of settlement that day. You know what I mean? And it may not happen that day, it may not happen that month, but I'm saying that to say that people have this idea that running out in the street with a bullhorn and yelling is the only thing you can do. Well, that's not true. There's so many different assets to go, and there's so many different facets to protest and agitation that are just bigger than doing the public stuff in the protest. And I think people haven't moved beyond that.
Do you think that there's a difference in treatment on gendered grounds when it comes to Black protests on the streets? Do you think there's a difference in how Black men are regarded, Black women, even Black LGBTs? Do you think everybody's handled the same way, especially when it comes to law enforcement and so on and so forth? Or do you think there's a difference?
There's absolutely a difference. I have seen protests led by Black men, and they go one or two ways. First of all, the protests that I've seen by Black men have happened in states where they are able to, how can I say this? They can physically show that they can defend themselves, and I'll let people draw their own conclusions from that. And when I see them out front holding their protection, people who may have an issue with the way they move a different way. I've also seen protests where men are out there out front and the police presence is a lot more aggressive.
Yes.
I've seen that quite a few times,
yes,
where they're trying to make arrests, they're trying to snatch people out, and melees have happened and everything. When it's known that you're going to protest and you have the rainbow flag out there along with the BLM flag, along with these other organizations, I've seen protests get handled with kid gloves in a lot of different ways. When women are out front, I've seen some of the easiest, most relaxed protests, even though they're yelling and they're screaming at the cops and everything. I've seen the energy move a whole lot different, even though other people are around them too. So yeah, there's absolutely
Yeah.
The energy definitely changes depending on who is out front and who's allowed to be out front to lead these protests. Yeah, absolutely.
I've even had brothers, nationalist brothers, who do security, for a living, and they actually have formed they formed organizations to provide security for these types of protests. And they've even called me and said, "Man, it's getting completely out of hand," because they've been pushed to a position where they're not really even treated like security. They're treated like pit bulls that are expected to be, forced onto cops at the discretion of often some of these women that are leading the organization. And then it gets to the point, it got in one incident this brother told me about. He was saying it got to the point where his organization and the police were having a verbal negotiation about how to navigate it, because the women were getting so out of pocket that both groups of mostly men, just actually got to a point where they had to talk to each other because it was just that far along. And the women were expecting them to, operate physically, toward the police on behalf of what they were saying in their protests. It was a weird kind of dynamic. And he was telling me several different stories along these lines. So, this kind of gendered aspect to protest, I find interesting because it's not talked about enough, in my opinion. And I think it does have an impact, and it even has an impact on how Black men protest, how Black men participate in, political protests and onward. And I think, there was a good period of time right around Michael Brown where I was in direct conversation with BLM members who were making statements like, well, the women are on the front lines, the men are too cowardice, so on and so forth. But there was no regard about the difference in treatment. So I wanted to kind of put that out there. Now, what I'm going to do, I got two people, so I'm going to allow someone up to ask a question, and then I'm going to take you down and let Torraine respond. So the first one here is hold on, let me pull the names up. So we got Commander Grand Negro Black Knight Rowe. Okay.
Hey man, yes sir, I hear you. I follow you on Facebook, Twitter, all that, and I want to say just off the rip, brother T. Hasan Johnson, thank you for creating the Black Man Institute. Thank you for doing this work. It's very, very vital. It's very, very important. Like I'm in post grad, and some of the strategies that y'all brothers has been implemented, I use in my grad papers. So I want to say thank you just off the rip, just off the muscle. Brother Torraine Walker, I followed you in them Twitter spaces. You see me, brother. Oh yes, I'm that brother. So like no other. I want to say thank you for your work and what you do on the front line for us brothers. I don't appreciate some of the women in the nonprofit sector taking advantage of what Black men, just Black men of our struggle and stuff that we go through. I've noticed personally, I'm involved in a case with women in the nonprofit sector who has maligned and neglected me and used misandry to undermine a Black organization to help out the Black collective. This is the reason why I created the Negro Black Knights Heritage Club, because of the malign and neglect when it comes to Black men and also the Black men leadership in these roles in these civic organizations. But that's besides the point. Brother Torraine, what are some of the things, Torraine, am I saying, I hope I'm pronouncing your name, Mr. Walker. I'm going to say Mr. Walker. I'm just going to sum it up, brother, Mr. Walker. I want to give you that respect. Brother, Mr. Walker, what are some of the things that we can do in the nonprofit sector to make sure that Black men leadership is developed and cultivated? A lot of these organizations do not support Black men leadership. They support women leadership at the expense and say that that's diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I feel like that's morally and ethically backwards. What are ways that we can rectify this as men so that we can make sure that our community is served in an equitable and a commendable fashion? And that's my question to you, big brother.
Okay, I'm gonna take you down, but I appreciate the question, man, and keep it pushing. All right.
That's a very good question, and it's a very difficult question to answer, because for a brother in the nonprofit sector, it's going to be very difficult to try to change that culture, because that culture is very centered around women leading. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but I'm saying if you want to try to center men, specifically Black men, in that world, the first thing you got to do is find men. You gotta uplift men who are, first of all, qualified to lead. That's the same thing I would say about anybody. Find men who are experienced in that sector and find them qualified to lead and put them forward to be in leadership positions. Now, when you do that, there's going to be pushback. You just got to understand that going in, because there are a lot of people in that sector who have an automatic aversion to men, especially Black men, taking on any sort of leadership role in those worlds. But once you encounter that resistance, ask questions. How come this person isn't fit to lead? Why can't they lead? Why do you feel like this person is not qualified to lead? How come they can't have a voice if they're a part of this organization? And if you don't get the answers you speak, if you don't get the answers you like, take it as high to the leadership as you can. And if that doesn't work, take it to the media. Do it that way. A lot of things don't move unless you basically put people on blast about what they're doing. And then all of a sudden you'll be surprised how many things change. So that's my say. Take it to the leadership. Find qualified male candidates. If they don't get a fair shake in the leadership, take it outside the leadership.
Okay. We're going to bring up Kyle H. Kyle, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I can. Can you hear me, Dr. Johnson?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for allowing me to come up here and ask this question. Torraine, when you were saying about how the requirements, especially during civil rights, where they're agitators and negotiators, it just seems that for the majority of our people, Black people, we've gone away from from understanding the importance of the negotiation in itself, where it's seen like the agitation, things that are seen up front, that are visceral, that get emotions entwined into things. That is what's more important, or that's what's seen as leadership and what change is supposed to look like, instead of understanding the opposition and negotiating with them to come to an agreement that is beneficial. So can you go ahead and explain or give us some more information on the people or the groups that are trying to be the negotiators, but they're falling down, or at least they're not getting the support from the folks that are going to be agitation first, then negotiation, or if any? Appreciate it.
Okay. Did you understand the question, Torraine?
Let me just be clear. You're asking me who are the people who are negotiating, but they're not getting any sort of attention, or they're not getting support? Is that the question?
Yes, sir. I was just wondering if you were able to see, it's like those organizations, or the folks that are actually wanting to be in the room to come to to bring people to negotiations.
I see.
Okay, I'm gonna take you down, Kyle, but appreciate the question.
Well, to answer the brother's question, there are people who, as far as organizations, I don't know of any that are really doing that, but I think there are people who are negotiators and who know how to go speak truth to power in a way that power can understand, and they can force some concessions. But the majority of those people are not in movements that are fundamentally based in street protests. A lot of those people are lawyers. A lot of those people are some politicians at a certain level. Some of those people are people who actually work within organizations, but they're the people who know how to go into a room, shut the door, and have conversations that people in the general public may not know. Now, here's the thing. That can be a very risky thing, because if you are having quiet meetings and the people in your organization or the people outside of that don't know what you're doing, that can raise suspicion. And I understand that, because look, we're coming out of this situation right now that we're talking about, and we're also coming out of 50 years of organizations doing these backroom deals that may not benefit people who are on the ground, who have to live with these decisions. But I think we have to understand that everything, like I said earlier, does not begin on the street. You have to have people, after you've got the attention of people who, after your street protests, you have to have people who are skilled enough to go into a room with the people who hold the balance of power on an institutional level, and say, this is what the people want. This is what we'd like to have. This is how we can negotiate. Let's see if we can meet in the middle. You know what I mean? That has to happen. And I don't think that comes from institutions. It comes from individuals who have been vested by institutions, who have the people's best interest at heart to be able to go and speak for them. Like in Selma, I think Selma was an excellent movie when it talked to show how negotiation works and how you have street protests and you have people who can go sit with the power structure and negotiate on your behalf. But those people have to have the backing of the people, first of all, and they have to have a base that's going to respect the people that they speak for. Yeah.
All right. All right, man. I appreciate that. Well, I think we'll begin to close it out here. I want to get your closing thoughts, as well as anything else you want to, extend to the audience about the work you're doing.
There is as long as Black people live in America, there is going to be a need for somebody to advocate for us. As long as our position as a socioeconomic group, as a race of people, as a class remains where it is, we're going to need people who can speak for us and people who love us and advocate for us. And I say, if you're going to have people who are going to speak for you, make sure those people know who you are first. Make sure those people respect you, and make sure every time those people open their mouth, whether it's on a public platform, whether it's on a private platform, whether it's in the negotiating tables that I just mentioned, make sure that those people love themselves first and love you for first and foremost of all. That doesn't mean they have to be perfect. That doesn't mean they're always going to get it right. But you have to come from a place of love for Black people before you can be good to anybody. And that means all Black people. And unfortunately, a lot of people who are speaking for us only have love for themselves and they don't care about us as a collective. And those people have to be gotten out of the paint. They have to be removed out of the way so people who love us can speak for us. So that's my thoughts on that.
Right. Well, look, man, I think if I haven't communicated it to you in the past, I'm going to reiterate it now. You have a standing invite to the Onyx Report, good brother. So you're always welcome here, man. Especially if you have something you want to, let people know about. My platform is available to you, and I really and truly honor the work you do. It's an inspiration for me, personally and professionally, man. So I just want you to know that I believe in giving people their flowers while they're here, and since I have you here, I'm gonna take that opportunity because I think your work is profound. I think it's pushing boundaries that you may not even be aware of. So thank you, brother.
No, thank you. And just to let everybody know, I'm actually working. I'm in the embryonic stages of putting together a documentary about Black men in some of these fields and some of the ways we've been pushed out of some of these fields and some of the ways that we kind of get shut out from established avenues and how we create our own outlets. And some of it's going to touch on the manosphere. Some of it's going to touch on academia. So that's kind of what I'm focused on now, as well as my other work. So if you want to know more about that, go to my website, torrainewalker.com. If you want to support that work, you can go to torrainewalker.com/#support if you want to contribute to that. And I'll be making a formal announcement about what I'm working on really soon. So just show me love on that if you can.
I put the link to your website in the chat. I'm also going to add it to the description. Just scroll down and look for sources, and you'll see all the articles and links that we kind of used for today. And of course, Torraine's website. Now, I didn't put the links for the video clips, but you can go to Torraine's Twitter and you can check some of those out. Did you want to share how they can reach you, find some of your media material?
Yeah, absolutely. You can reach me on Twitter at Torraine Walker. I'm also on Instagram at Torraine Walker. Where else? I'm on Facebook at Torraine Walker. You see the trend here, people. I'm on TikTok. I have a TikTok page that I finally opened up. People have been begging me to do it for the longest. I'm on TikTok at Torraine Walker.
Okay.
Pretty much I think that's everything. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok on Torraine Walker. And also I have my YouTube channel, Torraine Walker TV. And what else? I think that's pretty much everything. Yeah. And again, if you want to support me, you can go to my Cash App, my Venmo, my what's the other one? I always blank when it's time for me to put these things out. I said my Venmo already, my Patreon, and I have a Patreon, Torraine Walker. Pretty much everything is under my name, Torraine Walker, so I'm not hard to find.
Well, I appreciate you, man. Thanks for coming up today, good brother.
No, brother, thank you for having me on, man, and thank you for having this conversation. I think it's important, and I want to say much love and much respect to the work you do, man. You've really been a groundbreaking person to move these conversations into the academic space. I know how hard it is to have these conversations in the academic world, how calcified it is. So much love to you.
I appreciate that, man. All right, man. I'll let you later.
All right, man. Be good.
All right. Shout out to Dr. Ronald Neal coming through. Just continue to call out frauds and snake oil saleswomen. Shout out to Ron O'Neill. So make sure you support Dr. Ron O'Neill's channel. Make sure you support the Green Gorilla. Make sure you support BGS Ibmore. Make sure you support Dr. Thunder. Make sure you support, of course, Torraine Walker. Make sure you support these brothers who are trying to produce content that is independent, that reflects Black male thought without the concern of Black men being bought off to, kind of kowtow to the mainstream. You got people that actually are doing work on the ground and doing work in media that are designed to, not only restore the Black male image, but speak truth. I mean, really, it's that simple. So shout out to all of those doing that. And I hope you guys will continue to support brothers that are, because the pushback and the hostility, even the low boiling contempt at Black men and boys is so calcified and palpable that I can't help but, try and put it out there to be seen and critiqued and acknowledged for exactly what it is. And that's what I hope we do on every show, but we damn sure did it today. So I appreciate Torraine coming through to do that. Yeah, man. So thank you for supporting. It is what it is. I'll be up. I'll probably do something in the next day or two, because like I said, I want to cover some of the stuff going on with the Spider-Man series. I think there's some elements there that are that have to be talked about. And I do support brothers checking that out if you get a chance to, especially if you have sons. If you have sons or young boys that you are mentoring, I think it's not only a good film to watch, but, it opens up conversations that I think are pertinent and invaluable in many respects. But one of the things I will say about the film, without going through any spoilers, is you end up seeing, what tends to happen when Black men are forced to operate with very little support, mostly on their own. And I think that was captured pretty well in this film. And I thought it was important because I don't know any brothers that are in my circle that haven't had to live that reality, and our sons having to live that reality. So it definitely put that on the front block to be looked at. And I think it's important that we, examine that. So anyway, check that out if you get a chance. Keep supporting the Onyx Report. And I look forward to seeing y'all soon. Y'all have a good one. Peace. I am here to tell you, brothers, we are not criminals by birth, perennial rapists, incapable intellects, man-children, sperm donors, child support wellsprings, success objects, walking phalluses, ATM machines, lottery tickets, unintelligent henchmen, valueless assassins, pro bono mercenaries, unpaid bodyguards, interchangeable stepfathers, child discipline proxies, unpaid repairmen, workhorses, emotional tampons, or any other socially accepted dehumanizing stereotype. We are thinkers, inventors, innovators, leaders, fathers, and men. Embrace your humanity, know your worth, and extend your time, attention, and resources only to those who genuinely respect you. And remember, your worth is not defined by meeting other people's narcissistic, selfish, and unrealistic needs. You define your worth. Peace.